I'm going to get started here with Dr. Mapstone. One of the biggest questions we got today, and we get very, very often, I'm sure you hear it a lot. What is the difference between Parkinson's depression versus regular general depression? Does it matter? And does it have anything to do with how it's treated?
Well, that's a complicated question. I think the short answer is they're very similar. So regular depression is the emergence of feelings and of depression and sadness and perhaps guilt, low self-esteem, that we really don't completely understand all of the factors that come into that. People with Parkinson's disease have a higher risk of depression, and that sort of depression is complicated by the psychosocial factors that are involved as well, that go around having a chronic illness like Parkinson's disease. So they do overlap quite a bit, but the factors that contribute to them might be different given the fact that people with Parkinson's have a chronic condition. As far as treatment goes, the same treatments that are used in major depression or unrelated to Parkinson's disease would be the first in line to be tried in depression in people with Parkinson's disease. So the first steps would be very similar.
Okay, great, thanks. Dr. Katz, several questions around the topic of melatonin. So one of the issues that some people hear is like, take melatonin right before you want to go to bed, but that sort of messes with the circadian rhythms, right? If like the light is like it's already gone, like don't you want to take it a little bit earlier than that? Also, what about, is there such thing as too much melatonin? Do people with Parkinson's have to take more melatonin than people that don't have Parkinson's? Yeah, what are some of those more practical aspects of it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the ideal way to take melatonin is 1 to 2 hours prior to your bedtime. So you do want to take it before your bedtime so that it kicks in and that tells your brain, okay, it's time for bed. And then in terms of, there is some evidence that there's reduced rates of melatonin in people with Parkinson's disease than normal. I think that a lot of it is not as well known or characterized as, some of the other aspects of Parkinson's disease. In terms of the amount of melatonin, I would say that, if someone without Parkinson's disease has sleep-related, insomnia, they can also try melatonin, but that it's more likely that people with Parkinson's disease have issues where they need more, where they need to take melatonin. So I don't think there's so much, if someone has a sleep-related issue and they don't have Parkinson's disease, they probably have a similar kind of issue going on in the brain as someone with Parkinson's disease who needs to take melatonin for insomnia. I usually just start with 3 to 6 milligrams for sleep-related issues and for REM behavior disorder as well, which is the dream enactment that I talked about. You want to take about that much. Usually we don't go above 6 milligrams if people need it for insomnia, just because it doesn't help at higher amounts. For REM behavior disorder, we go up all the way to 15 milligrams, just because that's just what's in practice. And I think the clinical trial went up to 12 milligrams, but we see some benefit in going up to 15. It does have a sedative effect, so it's similar kind of chemically at higher doses to taking clonazepam, for example. And so it can make people tired the next day if you take too high of a dose. And so that might be something just to keep in mind. But I think as long as you stay to that, maximum 12 to 15 milligram dose for for dream enactment, maximum about 6 milligrams for insomnia, you should be fine. It's a very safe, natural chemical.
Okay, great. Dr. Mike, somebody said that as their Parkinson's progresses, they feel like cross-training helps them more than a single exercise. Do you know if there's any data on that, benefits of cross-training with Parkinson's?
I wish that I could just off the top of my head cite a study. But at the same time, I think as Parkinson progresses, it gets harder to have big dynamic movements, and more components of balance impairments can kind of show their ugly ugliness in daily function, let's say. So I think cross-training is certainly a way to get after that graph that I had on the slides of, cross-training usually includes some component of stretching what's tight. It usually includes some component of strengthening what's weak, and it usually includes some component of good cardio. So instead of just doing one thing, I think it makes sense, kind of like Amy mentioned during her talk when she said she views exercise more as movement, to just find a lot of different ways to safely move in multiple directions. But the thing I'll add to that too is, if you have the ability to stand, if your balance is not so impaired that you need an assistive device to get around, the more you can do in weight bearing against gravity compared to things like, water aerobics or a chair exercise program, the better, simply because you tend to strengthen that response to proprioceptive input of knowing where my body is in space.
Great, thanks. And I think, the constantly varied idea of if you're going to do a whole bunch of different exercises, you're constantly taxing different muscles, different cognitive, thinking about like what you're doing and having to concentrate on something. So, and also if you love to do a bunch of things, great. Like you said, the best exercise is the exercise you're going to do. If you actually hate everything but cycling, just stay on the bike. Like it's better than not doing it, right? So I think it's going to be, sort of an individual thing. Okay, Dr. Mapstone, one of the questions that we got has to do, well, we got a couple around hallucinations. And somebody is asking, there's hallucinations with insight and then without insight. And maybe you could talk a little bit about what that is. And then also, is with insight a sign that it's not as severe? Like when you don't have insight, does it mean your hallucinations are worse or that your Parkinson's is progressing more seriously?
Yeah, good questions, and something that really needs to be clarified in people's minds. When we think about visual hallucinations and visual misperceptions, they kind of fall into three classes. The first are visual misperceptions, and this is seeing something that is based in reality, but misperceiving what it actually is. So these are things like seeing, for example, things moving in the shadows, or as you walk past, or for example, you misperceive something on a table to look like something else that it's not really, it is. These are usually mild, very fleeting, and at some point in our life, most of us have probably had these things where you maybe see lines on a surface that aren't really there or something like that. So those we classify as misperceptions, and it has to do more with the perceptual aspect, the way that your information is directly receiving information into the brain through the visual system, and how that's initially being processed by the visual cortex. The second form of hallucinations we think about are formed visual hallucinations that can, that usually insight is retained, meaning that you understand that what you're seeing cannot be real and is not real. We distinguish those from hallucinations without insight retained, because that's an important criterion where other processes in the brain start to take over, and these are along the lines of delusions. And so a delusion is believing or making up a story around what you're seeing. So let me give some concrete examples. If you see what looks like a person standing in the room next to you, but you understand that nobody's in the room with you, and you understand that you must be seeing things and that this isn't real, that would be a formed visual hallucination with insight retained, meaning you have insight, you understand that that's not real. If you see somebody standing next to you and it looks like your deceased father or grandmother or somebody you know, and you begin talking to that vision, we would say that's kind of crossed the line to lacking insight into knowing that that is not a real thing that you're seeing, and that you begin to interact. And these could become problematic because you can start having behaviors built up around those delusions that might put you in danger. For example, if you see children playing in your yard, with insight retained, you might realize that these are not real, that there's not really children out there, and you kind of just ignore them. When insight is not retained, you might go out and try and chase them away. which with somebody with a movement disorder or gait or balance problem, that could be problematic. You might get yourself into trouble and a risk for fall, for example. So those are the reasons why we tend to dissociate between visual misperceptions, visual hallucinations with insight retain, and visual hallucinations without insight retain. The important thing really for what I'd like the audience to know is that if you have any of these, it's important to tell your doctor about them, your neurologist, anybody who's caring for your Parkinson's disease, because some of the more complex hallucinations can be caused by some of the medications that may be used to treat your Parkinson's disease.
Great. And then the question that goes along with that, I think, is the question that people are really worried about. What if you are with somebody who's having a hallucination that is, it's not happening, they don't have the insight, like they actually thinks it's happening. What is something that you can say or do in that situation?
Yeah, that can be a very scary thing for care partners to see their loved one actively hallucinating. If the patient is not in danger to themselves, it's probably not worth it to try and convince them that hallucination that they're seeing is not real. That is to say, I wouldn't go out of my way to argue with somebody that no, there really aren't children playing in the yard or there's nobody in the house if they don't seem particularly disturbed by the hallucination. If they do begin to get agitated and begin to put themselves at risk for a fall or for behaviors that might get themselves into trouble, that's where you want to move and try and redirect the individual. It's a good idea to try and get them to think about something else, to move their focus of attention away from what they think they're seeing and get themselves out of that risk. So some things you could say is, I know it looks like there's somebody here in the room, but there's not. Why don't you come with me into the other room and we'll go see if we can find something on the TV, or let's go make a sandwich, or somehow distract them to get them out of the situation. Clearly, if somebody is hallucinating and agitated and acting in a way to get themselves into trouble, you want to take their personal physical safety as a first priority. And that may mean calling 911 if they're doing things that get themselves into physical risk.
Great, thank you. Dr. Katz, you didn't mention ambien, but somebody asked the question. They said that they've been taking an increased amount of ambien over the years and require higher and higher dosing. Is there a problem with this? What is the relationship with ambien and Parkinson's and other Parkinson's meds?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we generally don't use ambien. It's been shown to increase the risk of falls the next day. Primarily, that's the reason why we don't use it. It also can cause some behavioral disturbances, not true dream enactment, but people will, make themselves a sandwich at night and then wake up with like a half-eaten sandwich in their bed and not really know where it came from. So people will have, sort of behaviors that are just very peculiar to ambien in terms of their kind of sleep, wake behaviors. And so we really don't recommend that medication. The other medicines that I listed are much safer.
Okay. And is ambien tend to have more habit forming, like you just build a tolerance versus some of the other ones, or do the other ones as well seem to have to keep increasing the doses for it to work?
Yeah, I mean, ambien, yeah, I wouldn't, I'd have to look into whether or not ambien really people, actually build a true tolerance to the medicine and need higher doses. I would say that I'm not aware of any type of, withdrawal if someone's, for example, stops taking ambien. So I don't think it's habit forming in that way. I have to look into why someone would need higher doses other than just their insomnia is worse. But we really just don't recommend it. It's a dangerous drug for people with Parkinson's.
Great. Dr. Mike, I'm a care partner with a person with Parkinson's who uses a walker. What are some of the best exercises or resources for that person?
Probably the single best resource to start with would be your local physical therapist. But what they'll do is they'll prescribe some exercises for the person that you care for, which, often include things like, strengthening the legs from multiple directions. So, earlier I demonstrated a squat. If you use a walker, it's tough to do that without some support. But a lot of times with patients in those situations, we'll start out with something simple that they could do at home. For example, as long as their sink isn't wet from just having done dishes, hanging onto the inside of the sink and squatting from there. So that way they've got something to hang on to for support. Or if they've got a nice sturdy chair at home, things like that. Additionally, strengthening the hips in an outward direction to the side and behind you. There are exercises like that that can be done even laying down. So for example, if you think about Suzanne Summers and some of her commercials from the 80s doing leg lifts out to the side, those kind of things. Or the Thigh Master for adduction. Or without any equipment, just laying on the bed and bending the knees to do some bridging, bringing the hips up towards the ceiling and lowering them slowly. Those can be great ways to strengthen hips and legs. In addition to that, when they've got something to hang on to, I feel like with and without Parkinson's, most people I see are weak in their plantar flexors, the calf muscles. And the calf muscle is the single most important muscle for gait efficiency, taking bigger steps, and for stabilizing the knee during walking. So I think there are a lot of easy ways to get after it. And I think while I've said a lot, the general rule would be don't overthink it. It's easy to say, well, with a walker, maybe I can't. And I'd say the more you can focus on things that you can do and ways to modify so you're safe doing them, the better.
Great. And you bring up a great point. I mean, most towns, most areas are going to have a physical therapist, even if they're not a physical therapist specifically with people with Parkinson's. And it's just the other great thing is to go get an assessment, no matter where you are in your process, no matter whether you've been diagnosed for 2 days or 20 years, there is something to be gained by going to get an assessment, because even if you're feeling great, even if you feel like you don't have any mobility problems, you can go, and it's a great gauge for you to say, okay, wow, I did this, and a year later, here's where I am, and here's where I need to make an improvement. So going to the local PT is a great idea. Dr. Mapstone, here's another common question. So can you talk a little bit about the difference between depression and apathy?
Right, so that's a good question. So apathy can be a symptom of depression. Depression is a constellation of symptoms that we think about that's characterized primarily by low mood, feeling depressed, and we all kind of know what that feels like, but this is way above and beyond normal ranges of mood. Apathy can be a feature of depression, and apathy technically is the dismotivation to do anything. Trying to come up with a good lay term for this, but it's basically not wanting to do things. This can, again, be a part of depression, but it can also exist on its own in Parkinson's disease. And this is a very challenging feature to struggle with, because it's the care partner is typically frustrated that the person with Parkinson's is not interested in doing anything. And so they feel like, the care partner often feels like it's their role to motivate and to get the person going, and they can't figure out why the person with Parkinson's disease does not want to do anything. They want to sit in the chair and not interact and not engage. It's a very troubling symptom for an outside person to view in a loved one, because it feels like they've given up. I think it's important first to know that this has a biological underpinning. There's a reason why these people are acting this way. It's not because they don't care. It's not that they aren't involved. It's that they can't do these things. The biology is driving this behavior. So that's the first step, is to know that this is not your person or your loved one choosing to do nothing or choosing to ignore you. This is not what's happening here. There's a biology behind this. And just like their hand might shake with tremors, or they might have trouble walking. There's a biology behind this apathy and this behavior, and that's what makes it confusing and difficult to understand. Some of the things that you can do to help with apathy are to provide structure. And this is one thing that the care partner can do, is to provide a schedule. I don't think that you need to be, overly prescriptive in everything that they need to do, but it helps to have a few tags in time that cue the individual to movement activity, to doing something engaging, to getting up and going out. Those sorts of things are important to have cues, and in a structure or some sort of a plan for the day helps to trigger those sorts of behaviors in the person with Parkinson's disease. So it's a very challenging symptom, and it's something that each family is going to have to adapt and to figure out what works best for them. It's very hard. It's one of the ones that I hear about most as being the most difficult symptom to deal with.
Right. Great. Thank you. I have a couple, Dr. Katz, around leg cramping, and somebody have said, is there something that can be done to manage really bad leg cramps at night? And then also the feeling that somebody said, my legs feel really heavy and tired. Is that normal for Parkinson's? Is that neuropathy? Like what's going on? I mean, I know you would need to talk to them personally, but what's sort of the common thing around leg cramps?
Yeah, so leg cramps are a common issue in Parkinson's. I didn't address it in my talk just because of time limitations. And, there's a couple of strategies. One is working with your physical therapist to learn some good ways to stretch out the legs, the calf muscles, and usually the pain is in the calf muscles. And so really actually just stretching them before going to bed in the evening can be very helpful. Just making sure that people are staying hydrated, and then making sure that people aren't wearing off, and that it's not because they're not taking, if you're not taking any Cinemet or Rytari at bedtime, then you're going to have leg cramps probably. So the idea is to make sure that you are taking some dopaminergic, some dopamine medicine at bedtime to help with the leg cramps. And then there's a number of different treatments that we use. Some people swear by magnesium. There was a recent clinical trial that compared magnesium to placebo and actually showed that magnesium didn't work better than placebo. But if it's your placebo, keep taking it. It doesn't really matter, right? As long as it works for you. Then there are some people that swear by a glass of tonic water. I also think that's placebo, because you need to drink like 40 glasses of tonic water to get the amount of tonic that you need. But hey, I have patients that swear by that, and it's not something that has been that well studied, so it's safe. Just keep doing that. Sometimes we give people muscle relaxers like baclofen, or we give people gabapentin, which can help as well. So those are usually the strategies, and typically we can get that symptom under control. The second part of the question about tired and heavy legs, that might be an off symptom where you're, if you're not taking any dopamine at nighttime, you're going to feel stiff and heavy, and you just need to take some at nighttime. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. The person who was talking about heavy legs said they are taking gabapentin, 300 milligram tablets at bedtime, and it's not helping. So I think it's kind of, maybe try the things that you talked about, and also talk to their doctor about.
Yeah, it's hard because a lot of the neurological symptoms are kind of vague, right? So heavy, tired legs, you really need to talk with the doctor, or, with whoever your provider is, just to get down to the nitty gritty. Like, what do you mean by that? Is that something you experience during the rest of the day when the medicine wears off? Is it different, similar? So a lot of it is, the history solves the mystery in medical care. So we just need to have a little bit more details of that for that specific individual.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Dr. Mike, this is a timely question. She said, my person with Parkinson's lives in assisted living, and the facility is closed down because of the pandemic, so it can't really help him. He can't go to find a PT to help him now. What can we do with the added confinement? And I think that's a question a lot of people have. What are, you know, what can somebody like that do? I mean, you know, notice that somebody's in an assisted living, that person can't visit them, can't really help them, so they're not supervised. What, you know, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of options. And the good news is we're in a time where it's easier to connect than, let's say, the 80s when there wasn't internet. But one option is they still might be eligible to have somebody from like a home health agency come and work with them for physical therapy or occupational therapy. Also, a lot of the staff members at assisted living facilities will still provide some sort of activities. If none of those were an option, then the next thing would be, you know, the good news is there's YouTube. The drawback is YouTube is not monitored on, you know, it's not a two-way platform. So the person in the assisted living facility would need to have a really good understanding of what limitations they might face. For example, if they're kind of on the fence of walking around with the walker, but also maybe needing a chair a lot of the time, it's probably best for them to do chair-based exercises because they're unsupervised. So, you know, there are a lot of options out there. They might even consider too, asking around or having a caregiver might ask around to see if there are physical therapists who could perform telehealth visits with them. Up until, you know, this week, telehealth was very limited, and now it's opening up more and more in terms of what's covered. Even if it's not, you might still find some folks who have a new sense of availability from cancellations from patient visits, who might be still willing to set up some time to chat and come up with some strategies. So hopefully that helps. I think at the bare minimum, exercises in the bed, strengthening the hips and legs with bridges, with modified planks, or finding a chair-based class or videos for chair-based exercise are good moves.
Great. Thanks. Let's see. Somebody, another on the coronavirus, Dr. Katz. The person said, I take a regular OTC ibuprofen for pain. Recently in France, there was a recommendation to avoid NSAIDs. What is your view? I feel like it came out that it wasn't a problem, but is there something?
Yeah, I don't think as far as I know, that there's really no evidence regarding that. So I think we just have to wait for more research to come out. I don't think that there's a clear negative relationship at this point that we know about.
Okay. This one might be, is urinary incontinence associated with Sinemet, or is it?
Urinary incontinence typically gets better with Sinemet.
Okay.
It won't get worse.
Okay, well, that's good. Dr. Mike, should you exercise every day? This is actually a question that comes up frequently. And part of it is due to, you know, there are some people who've spent their life exercising and they get Parkinson's and they're like, great, I'm just going to do it more. Some people didn't spend their life exercising, and then all of a sudden someone's told them you have to do it every day. And oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And sometimes, especially with the prescription to have intense exercise, it can be it can feel wrong. It can feel terrible to somebody, right, who's not used to that. And so they often ask, how much is too much? When do I know that it's too much? Should I exercise every day? What would you say to that?
For people, so here in Dallas, I've been fortunate to be able to be part of a study where we research the impact of non-contact boxing on motor impairments of Parkinson's disease. And we tend to get in that research study a lot of folks who are previously deconditioned. They weren't ever exercisers. Their symptoms, they haven't been exercising to manage their symptoms. And so with them, I usually start really slowly. And so there's kind of a gauge of how much is too much. I'd say every day is fine if you can handle it. But what most people find is at least 2 and preferably 3 days a week is a really good starting place. Dr. Lori Mishley out there has a pro PD score system that is a growing thing that people are looking into, and there are people who tend to do better, say working out 3 days is better than 2, or 4 days is better than 3. So people who tend to work out more frequently in terms of days of the week tend to feel better. It's hard to make a change working out or exercising 1 day a week. At the same time, if you're new to this stuff, you should expect a certain level of soreness. And that's got nothing to do with Parkinson's disease and everything to do with muscles changing how they're used. So delayed onset muscle soreness is a very real thing that people tend to experience, especially when they're doing new activities. And for them, I try to have a heart-to-heart early on to say, if you're sore, that means you're changing the way your body works. That's a good thing. However, you'll know that it's not just muscle soreness if it feels like it's getting worse as you go, meaning I'm sore from yesterday's workout. I start working out today, I'm going to feel the soreness. But within a few minutes, if it feels like it's getting worse, well, that's probably something else. You know, that could be an overuse injury. That could be some other problem that maybe I just need to modify for. That's why I think it's really good to have a coach who knows what they're doing. And I love that there are more and more programs for people with Parkinson's out there. I worry a little when I hear folks with no specific training for dealing with people with Parkinson's, who maybe just like leading exercise classes, who want to make a difference. I think their heart's in the right place, but I think it'd be better if they had more resources. Because a lot of times with a few simple modifications, somebody can still be active without flaring up unneeded injuries or pain.
Yeah, great. I just wanted to read this. I believe this was from Patty as she was talking about the exercise. And she said, this is so valuable for people with Parkinson's. Cognition and non-movement systems are important, but I feel as though we acquire hope, skills, and encouragement from information and participation in boxing, biking, dance, etc. We should be intense advocates for what we can do to live better. This is what we are all about. Thank you, Dr. Mike. Just what I needed to hear at this time in history. So I wanted to share that. Let's see. Okay, I think we've gone through anything. Does anybody have any other questions before we sign off? Let's see.
No CBD questions. Wow, I added that in just.
I know we did have one. We had one person that said they found that the CBD oil has helped them with many of their symptoms, like insomnia and pain and tremor. It wasn't a question. But yeah, I was surprised too. I thought for sure we'd have lots of those. Let's see. Any other questions? I feel like we're good. Somebody asked where you can buy poles. They live in Wisconsin. Actually, we did have, there's a lot of different places you can buy poles. I mean, you could just go to REI. You could, Urban Polling is, Mandy Shintani is, she started Urban Polling, and it's just URBANPOLING. And we actually did a little interview about that. And you could look that up on our website and find out those polls. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's
for
about
urban polling for hiking, you know, with our group, we've taken a lot of different poles because there are a variety of price points for them for trekking poles. The ones from Urban Polling are a little more expensive. They don't pay me to say this, by the way. They're a little more expensive, but the folks who have them have found them to be worth it. The grip is more conducive to the type of use that's helpful for folks with Parkinson's. The way to adjust the length is more conducive to somebody that has fine motor problems, and the weight-bearing limit is much higher than the cheaper ones. I found that out of personal experience when we were climbing the highest peak in Texas, and we learned the wrong way with some of the cheap poles.
yeah. Great. Okay, so now we're getting all the questions. Somebody said, no, my neurologist says absolutely no CBD, no research, no studies to back it up. What is your opinion on it, Dr. Katz?
Yeah, I mean, I think that so the only formal studies are being done that I'm aware of are being done at University of Colorado, and they're really preliminary. I think they've just identified a maximum dose, about 50 milligrams, where people start to get headaches and just some other side effects where they can't tolerate a higher dose than that. But otherwise, I mean, so we don't really know kind of from a formal study. I would say probably just because I live in California and all of my patients take some form of medical marijuana, CBD, I mean, everyone. So I would say the CBD, because it's less, pro-psychotic. The THC compounds are really pro-psychotic. I would not take them. And so if you take things that are, 9-to-1 CBD to THC, where it's really mostly CBD, those are not psychotically active. That's not a psychotically active part of marijuana. And so as far as I can, say anecdotally, it seems okay. And I do think that it has a very strong placebo effect. Anything that you want CBD to help you with my patients seems to work. So, and there's a really, it has high propensity for placebo just because it used to be illegal. It's still legal in some places. We don't know about it. So it's, kind of trendy. So we don't know, the jury's still out. I think it is probably safe if you take CBD predominant substances, although knowing that they're not FDA regulated. So whatever they say on their bottle, we don't really know that that's what they have. But I do think it's generally safe, and the jury's out on whether or not it's more effective than placebo.
Great.